Welcome back to the English for Podcast. Today we are tackling something that I think a lot of English learners get a little freaked out about. The speaking portion of those proficiency exams.
Yeah, I totally get it. Speaking exams can make anyone nervous, even if you're usually pretty confident about your English.
But you know what? Once we figure out how these tests work, that speaking test can actually become like a superpower.
Totally. It's all about cracking the code, figuring out what the examiners are looking for.
I like that. Cracking the code. So let's decode this thing, shall we? What do the examiners actually want to see when they're listening to us speak?
Well, they're listening for mastery of 4 key areas. Fluency and coherence, lexical resource, grammatical range and accuracy, and of course, pronunciation.
Okay, wait, hold on. I think we need to pause for a sec. Some of our listeners might not be totally familiar with all those terms. Can we break them down a little bit? What exactly do we mean when we say lexical resource? What does that even mean?
You're right. We don't want to get too jargony.
Right.
So lexical resource basically means the variety and accuracy of your vocabulary. Can you use a wide range of vocabulary, and can you use it correctly?
So it's not just about knowing a ton of words, but choosing the right word at the right time, using it accurately and appropriately.
Exactly. And it's the same idea with grammatical range and accuracy. It's about showing that you can use different grammatical structures correctly, like different tenses, complex sentences, that sort of thing.
Got it. So we need to show off our vocabulary and our grammar skills.
Yeah.
But what about those other two, the fluency and coherence? How do those fit into the whole picture?
Okay, so fluency is about how smoothly and naturally you can speak. You don't want to be pausing and hesitating all the time. And coherence is about making sure your ideas are all connected and they flow logically. Almost like you're telling a story, right? It needs to make sense to the person who's listening.
It needs to make sense, right?
Absolutely. And that's where structure comes in. It's like having a roadmap or a plan for your response.
Okay, so tell me more about this roadmap or this structure. Where do we even begin?
Think of it like a journey. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end, right? We have our introduction, then the body of our response, and then finally the conclusion.
The classic intro, body, conclusion structure. I've heard of that before, but I have a feeling there's more to it than meets the eye.
There definitely is. And if we use it strategically, it can really showcase our language skills. For instance, that introduction can really make a strong first impression.
So what's the secret to a killer first impression? How do we start strong right out of the gate?
All right, well, first of all, keep it brief and to the point. Directly answer the question or clearly state your opinion right up front. Then give a tiny bit of context or background information, but don't get bogged down in the details. Oh, and here's a pro tip. Give a quick preview of the points that you're going to discuss in the rest of your answer.
Oh, I see. It's like we're giving them a sneak peek of what's coming up, like a little movie trailer.
Exactly. It shows them that you have a plan and that you're organized.
Okay, so we've got the introduction down. Now, what about the body? That's where we really dive into the details and expand on our ideas, right?
Yes. Think of the body as the main course of your speaking response. This is where you provide all the evidence, the examples, the explanations to really support your main points.
So how do we build a strong and convincing body for our response? What's the secret ingredient? The magic formula?
The key is to organize your thoughts logically. Maybe you want to use chronological order, explain things in the order they happen. Or maybe you want to do order of importance. Lead with your strongest point first. Whatever you choose, make sure you're using really clear transitions to guide the listener. Those words and phrases that help to connect your ideas smoothly.
You mean those words like firstly, however, in addition? All those linking words that help everything to flow together.
Those are perfect examples. They act as signposts. They help the listener follow along. Oh, and another thing, don't just state your opinions, make sure you're backing them up with specific examples.
Right. So instead of just saying, I think reading is important, I could explain why I think it's important and maybe tell a quick story about a book that really had a big impact on me.
Exactly. That brings it to life. It shows them that you're not just repeating things from memory, but you're actually thinking about the topic and engaging with it.
Okay, so we've nailed the intro. We've built this amazing body for our response. Now, how do we, wrap things up? How do we end strong with the conclusion that really makes an impact?
Yeah, the conclusion. This is your chance to bring everything together, to really drive your point home. But it's not just a summary.
Oh, really? So it's not just and in conclusion, here are all the things I just talked about. we need to do a little bit more than that.
Way more. You've presented all these incredible ideas. Now it's time to tie them all together and leave the listener with something to think about, something that makes them go, interesting.
Okay, I'm starting to get the big picture.
Yeah.
But what does a good conclusion look like in practice? What are the actual steps?
Okay, so first, you want to give a very quick summary of your main points. Just remind the listener what you've talked about. What are the key takeaways? And if you stated an opinion in your intro, this is a good place to restate it. But don't just repeat yourself word for word. Try to rephrase it in a slightly different way, maybe a more insightful way.
So we want to show the examiner that our thinking has evolved a little bit throughout the response.
Exactly. And here's the secret to a really memorable conclusion. End with a thought-provoking final remark. Maybe it's a question, a prediction, or even a personal reflection on the topic, something that sparks the listener's curiosity and shows that you've really been thinking deeply about the topic.
Ooh, I like that. It's like the little sprinkle of cinnamon on top of cappuccino.
Exactly. Now remember, having a solid structure is important. It's like having a strong foundation for your house. But to really make that house beautiful, you need to add some decorations, some extra flair.
Okay, I love a good home decorating metaphor. So what are these extra flair elements that can really make our speaking responses shine? What are we talking about here?
Well, we're talking about the little things, the subtle nuances that really demonstrate your mastery of English. For example, active listening is super important.
Oh yeah, active listening. That means like really paying attention to the question and making sure we understand exactly what's being asked, right?
Yes. It sounds simple, but so many people just jump into their response without really taking the time to fully understand the question.
It's like starting to cook a recipe without reading it first. You might end up with something totally different from what you expected.
Exactly. Active listening also means picking up on key words and phrases that you can then use in your own response. It shows the examiner that you're paying attention and that you can use the language effectively.
Okay, that makes sense. Now let's talk about vocabulary. We all know that using variety of words is important, but how do we do that without sounding like, like we're trying too hard?
Right. Well, the key is to use more sophisticated vocabulary naturally. Think of it like this. Imagine you're having a conversation with a friend. You wouldn't suddenly start using all these big words you've never used before just to try and impress them.
Yeah, that would sound super weird, kind of unnatural.
Exactly. So the goal is to use vocabulary that you're comfortable with, words that fit the context of the conversation.
So it's more about just like expanding our everyday vocabulary and then using it confidently.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to paraphrase or use synonyms if you can't think of the perfect word right away. Sometimes trying too hard to find that one perfect word can actually disrupt our fluency.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Sometimes simpler is better.
Yeah.
Especially if it helps us to speak more fluently.
Absolutely. Okay, now another area where we can really showcase our skills is grammar.
Oh, yeah. Grammar. It can be a little intimidating, but I know it's really important for demonstrating our proficiency in English. It's like the foundation of the language, right?
It's like the framework, the scaffolding that holds your entire response together. And one of the best ways to impress the examiners is by using a mix of simple and complex sentences.
So we don't have to make every single sentence this grammatically complex masterpiece. We can use simple sentences too.
Exactly. It's all about finding the right balance. Use simple sentences where it makes sense, and then strategically use more complex sentences to add variety and sophistication to your speech.
Okay, so it's like we're learning the rules so that we can break them in a stylish way, or at least like bend them a little bit to make our speech sound more interesting and dynamic.
You got it. Now, we can't forget about the element that I think makes most people the most nervous. Pronunciation.
Ah, yes, pronunciation. I think that's the part that trips a lot of people up. We can have perfect grammar, amazing vocabulary, but if we can't pronounce the words clearly, our message might get lost in translation.
Right, and when we get nervous, it's so easy to start rushing our words and mumbling and not speaking clearly.
So true. So, do you have any tips for staying calm and speaking clearly? Especially when we're feeling the pressure of the exam.
You know what they say? Practice makes perfect. Record yourself speaking and then listen back to it. Pay attention to the sounds that you find difficult and really focus on practicing those.
So it's like we're training our mouths to make those sounds correctly, like we're building muscle memory.
Exactly. And on the day of the exam, make sure to do some warm-up exercises for your mouth and your voice. That can really make a big difference.
Yeah, it's like stretching before you go for a run, right?
Yeah.
It helps to loosen everything up, gets the blood flowing, helps us to avoid those awkward stumbles and mumbles.
Exactly. Okay, now we've talked a lot about skills and strategies, but we can't forget about the most important thing of all, practice. Practice, practice, practice.
I mean, you're totally right. We can talk about all these strategies and tips, but if we don't actually practice using them, it's not going to help us when we're sitting in that exam room. So what are some practical things our listeners can do to really get ready for that speaking section?
Okay, well, mock speaking tests are like your secret weapon. You can find sample questions online, in test prep books, all over the place, and you just got to practice answering them under timed conditions. Like, really try to simulate that exam experience as much as possible.
It's like a dress rehearsal for the big show. Get those butterflies out of the way beforehand.
Exactly. And don't be shy about asking a friend or a teacher to listen to you practice and give you some feedback.
Yeah, feedback is so helpful. It's like having another set of eyes and ears to help you spot those areas where you can improve. Like, sometimes we don't even realize we're making a certain mistake until someone points it out to us.
Totally. Now, let's talk about the actual exam day. Because even if we've done tons of preparation, we might still feel those pre-exam jitters, right? Those nerves can creep up on you when you least expect it.
Oh, tell me about it. My heart always starts pounding right before a big test. It's like my body's own personal alarm clock. Do you have any tips for staying calm and focused when those nerves start to kick in?
Okay, one of my favorite techniques is visualization. Like, close your eyes and imagine yourself walking into that exam room feeling super confident, super prepared. Picture yourself speaking clearly and fluently, just nailing those questions.
Oh, I like that. It's like we're mentally rehearsing for success.
Right. And don't forget about the power of positive self-talk. You got to remind yourself that you've put in the work, you know this stuff, and you're ready to rock this exam.
You know, it's funny how much of a difference our mindset can make. Like, if we believe in ourselves, we're way more likely to actually succeed.
Absolutely. And one more tip for exam day. Focus on the process, not the outcome. So instead of worrying about the score, just focus on doing your best in that moment. Enjoy the chance to use your English skills.
That's such a good point. It's like they say, control the controllables. We can control our preparation, how much effort we put in. But the final score, that's up to the examiners.
Right. So walk into that exam room with a positive attitude, focus on communicating your ideas, and just trust that you've done everything you can to prepare.
Okay, now before we wrap up today, I just want to quickly mention a few common mistakes that I see test takers make. Because if we know what to watch out for, we're way less likely to actually make those mistakes.
Oh, that's a great idea. Let's talk about those pitfalls. What are some things our listeners should try to avoid?
Okay, well, one big mistake I see is people trying to memorize entire answers. I mean, it's good to have some prepared phrases and ideas in your back pocket, but if you try to memorize a whole script, you're going to sound like a robot, not a real person having a conversation. Plus, what happens if the question is a little bit different from what you expected? You might totally freeze up.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's much better to focus on really understanding the concepts and learning how to adapt our language to different situations, to think on our feet a little bit. Right. Another mistake is not paying enough attention to pronunciation. I see some test takers get so focused on grammar and vocabulary that they forget about speaking clearly and naturally.
It's like having this beautiful sports car with like a sputtering engine. It looks great, but it's not going to perform very well on the road.
Perfect analogy. And last but not least, don't forget about those nonverbal cues. Your body language, your eye contact, your tone of voice, all of that stuff plays a role in how you come across to the examiner.
So even though it's a speaking test, we're communicating with our whole bodies, not just our words.
Exactly. So stand up straight, make eye contact when it's appropriate, project your voice, and speak with confidence. It shows that you're engaged, you're present, and you believe in what you're saying.
Well, we've covered so much ground today.
Yeah.
From all those little grammar details to the big picture ideas like mindset and nonverbal communication. Any last words of advice for our listeners who are getting ready to tackle those speaking exams?
I would just say this. Remember that effective communication is not just about speaking perfect English. It's about connecting with the other person, expressing your ideas clearly, and having a real conversation. So try to relax, be yourself, and let your personality shine through.
I love that. It's about being authentic, being genuine, letting our unique voices be heard. Well, that wraps up our deep dive into the speaking section of English proficiency exams. We hope you found it helpful and encouraging.
To all our listeners out there, we believe in you. Remember, practice makes progress. Every little step you take brings you closer to your goal.
So keep practicing, keep learning, and keep reaching for your full English-speaking potential. We're cheering you on.
And remember, the world needs your voice. Go out there and speak with confidence and passion.
And that's it for this episode of the English Prep Podcast. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time for another deep dive into the world of English learning.